We've all heard that actions speak louder than words, but the truth is, words hold power too. From phrases meant to destabilize you to attempts to keep you compliant, we're shining a light on the narcissist's go-to phrases so we can better defend against manipulation. And as we go through these phrases, you'll notice that it's more about the intent behind the phrase than the actual spoken words. So pay attention to that. Now let's dive into 9 phrases that expose a narcissist for who they really are. So the first phrase is, I was gonna be nice, but now you don't deserve it. So when you hear phrases like this often, or even when you just feel like you have to prove your worth to someone else, it is a major red flag. And the person might not come out and say, I was going to be nice. They may use something specific that you'd expect them to do, regardless of whether you're arguing or happy, and then take it away at the last minute. So maybe they're talking about going with you to a family event or allowing you to hang out with your friends. And then they'll completely change their tune, claiming that you're unworthy. And to be clear, I am not talking about a parent giving consequences to a young child, although it's not okay to give love or kindness conditionally to a child either. But here I'm talking about a relationship with 2 adults. Even if those adults do happen to be parent and child, phrases like this really encapsulate not only the push-pull nature of the relationship, but they also indicate control. Phrases like this one are more like a thinly veiled punishment, meant to make you feel like you need to try harder to please them next time. And here's a comment from one of you who has dealt with this treatment as an adult child of a narcissistic parent. Whenever I say something my mom doesn't like, or I confront her about something, she gets angry and punishes me. I'm 37. In whatever way she can. Give me the silent treatment for 2 days straight, ignores my texts, denies any responsibility, and blames me for whatever it is. Even when I do certain things now, I still feel like I'm going to get in trouble. Relatable, isn't it? My name is Christina, and I want to welcome you to the Common Ego community. This is a very supportive community, and a lot of what we talk about here is narcissism. So if that's something that has touched your life, consider subscribing. So the next phrase you might hear from a narcissist is, you're the one trying to control me. And when you're hearing something like this from a controlling, abusive person, that is just about the definition of crazy-making behavior, because clearly they're the ones that are behaving in controlling ways. So it feels like pure projection. But this goes even deeper than that, because you'll usually be met with this phrase whenever you're trying to set boundaries. You asking for respect becomes you trying to dictate the relationship. And you trying to set boundaries turns into you manipulating how the other person is going to behave. And you might even begin to feel bad for trying to set these boundaries, like you've hurt them in some way by limiting their access to you. But please remember, access to you is a privilege, and it's one that you can control. No one deserves unlimited access just because, and you can set boundaries at any time with anyone. And here's a comment from one of you who's tried setting boundaries with a narcissist. When I express boundaries, they are violated on purpose by vindictive narcs. Consequences don't matter because they play the victim. I no longer try to set boundaries. No contact. So being consistent with boundaries is really the only way to set boundaries with a narcissist. But I agree with this commenter that they'll play victim and do everything they can to circumvent your boundaries. And if you can manage it, no contact really is best. But if not, you really can make progress with consistency and consequences. So another phrase you might hear from a narcissist is, agree with my opinions because they're a fact. And if you don't agree, you're stupid. So have you ever dealt with a narcissist who truly believed that their opinions are actual fact? If so, hit that like button right now. Because just about every narcissist wants you to believe that their opinions are the undisputed truth. And if you dare to question these so-called facts or introduce any differing perspectives, get ready for some intense criticism and even attacks on your character. You see, narcissists put their opinions on such a high pedestal that they can't even recognize it as opinion. To a narcissist, things like how you should feel or who you should vote for aren't just opinions. they're fact. So when you challenge their narratives with opposing viewpoints, no matter how politely, they'll see this as a threat. And so rather than having an open, thoughtful discussion, they resort to shaming tactics, the narcissist's favorite. They'll act as if disagreeing with them signals your personal failure at life. But please remember, you don't need their validation. Seek outside opinions, keep learning, but ultimately form your own conclusion. And it's important to approach things, even hot button topics, with humble curiosity. It's kind of like that saying that goes something like, the man who knows everything knows nothing. Once you think you have all the answers, that's when you're in trouble. And here's a comment that really illustrates what it's like to be with someone like this. Because I feel like I can't really be how I want to be, say what I want to say, act how I want to act, because I constantly feel anxious that the moment I show one slight thing out of place, he's gonna up and walk away. I have been trying my damnedest to be how he wants me to be. I've been so focused on making sure that I'm able to meet his wants and needs that I've entirely abandoned my own. It's a scary thought when you realized you've abandoned yourself. And it is scary, but I think it's a realization that we all come to at the end of these relationships. It's almost like you become a shell of your former self or a fraction of who you could or should be. So another phrase that you might hear from a narcissist in some shape or form is, I don't care what you or anyone else think. So a narcissist definitely wants you to think that they don't care about anyone else's opinions. And this usually even seems like it's very true. But the truth is definitely more nuanced than all that. You see, narcissists desperately depend on external validation. They're just selective about it. So when a narcissist is love bombing you, for example, they really don't care what other people think. But they do very much care what you think, at least for that moment. Because you are their main source of supply in that moment. And they very much need that supply from somewhere. They don't care about anything else as long as they're getting it. So this explains why a narcissist will brush off judgments or well-meaning advice from friends when they're telling them that they're moving too fast. Or when a narcissist is actively engaged in taking you down, they usually don't even care how bad it makes them look because they're getting supply from having other people on their side and also getting emotional reactions out of you. But the bottom line is that their very existence depends on external validation. It just comes from a revolving door of sources. And it has to be that way for a narcissist because they're so prone to getting bored with people and burning bridges that it's rare for them to have one person who's always by their side no matter what. And here's a comment from one of you who has seen how this plays out for the narcissist over time. Age is the great equalizer. They can't get the supply they need as they age because they can't use good looks anymore. Or they've burned so many bridges that no one wants anything to do with them anymore. They will get theirs. You just most likely won't get to see it. And ultimately, it shouldn't really matter to you anyway. And that is the truth. The further you get away from this relationship and this person, and the more healing work you do on yourself, the less you really care about whatever it is they have going on, good or bad. So here's another comment that you may hear from a narcissist in some form. My personal life is private. I don't owe you any explanation. So in essence, it's none of your business. And don't get me wrong, everyone has secrets. Everyone deserves some level of privacy. And there are things that we shouldn't have to explain to anyone. But when you're around someone who is keeping you from things that are very much your business, like shared finances or stepping outside a supposedly monogamous relationship, it's a problem. For a narcissist, phrases like this one, which is essentially some version of "it's none of your business," help them escape accountability. So they can omit facts, give half-truths, or spin together alibis, knowing you lack the insider knowledge to challenge them. And this permits all kinds of deception, betrayal, and recklessness. Yet let's flip that coin on its head. They sure do love nosing into your business, don't they? They'll pry about personal topics or demand justifications around benign choices. Their attitude screams, "I'm entitled to know everything about you, but how dare you expect the same of me?" So in the beginning, we talked about actions over words. It is super important. Actions over words, patterns over platitudes. Remember all of this when you're trying to figure out someone's motives. And here's a comment from one of you who has been there. I could not ask him about anything. Often he was making a big deal that I ask particular questions, calling me pushy. And we've probably all been in the position where we've had to tell somebody something is not really their business. But with a narcissist, what we're talking about here is how they will withhold things that are very much your business and tell you that it's not your business. So another phrase that you might hear from a narcissist is, "It's your fault I get so angry. It's because you provoke me." Now, a narcissist definitely won't take responsibility for their anger issues or outbursts. In their eyes, they're never the problem. Someone or something always made them act that way. And who's the prime target for blame? You guessed it. It's you. It's always going to be the person who's most convenient or closest to them, the person that they can get away with blaming. So whenever they're confronted about their anger and yelling and their cruel remarks, they come in fast with a bunch of excuses and deflection. So things like wanting to discuss the health of the relationship or standing firm on your boundaries become inflated threats to the narcissist. And the truth is, their reactions come from their own unhealed wounds, not any external issues. But healing involves vulnerability and self-responsibility, things too uncomfortable for the narcissist. And so they blame shift. But we and no one really can take responsibility for their emotions. We're all responsible for our own emotions. And here's a comment from someone who has felt the brunt of such blame shifting. I've experienced the narcissist rage many times, but this one stands out. One day my phone died, so I picked up his phone to do a Google search. He grabbed his phone out of my hand, threw it against a wall, and broke it in a few pieces. After that, he kept coming after me, saying his phone breaking was all my fault, and I had to figure out how to replace it. Which I did. I felt trapped, but I did get out. So another phrase you may expect to hear from a narcissist is, "Stop judging everything I do. You are so critical of me." And again, this sounds like projection, doesn't it? But what's really going on here, what's beneath the surface, is that a narcissist cannot handle any sort of criticism, regardless of how it's delivered. Even requests for basic decency in their eyes are an attack. The narcissist is above feedback, and they're beholden to no one. So when they're confronted about hurtful behaviors, expect shaming counterattacks on your character. Suddenly you get labeled judgmental and overly critical for daring to tell them that they've hurt you or someone else. Then the conversation becomes about how you're unable to have compassion for them. See how this went full circle? It's a maneuver that puts you on the defensive so they can play the victim and evade responsibility once again. And again, this is a phrase that you may have said when someone was actually being critical of you. And this is where we want to talk about motivations, because we're not talking about moments where you may have been critical of this narcissistic person. It might happen. We're talking about those times when you are trying to stand up for yourself and you're met with something like rage or a counterattack that puts you on the defensive so that you inevitably back down and maybe even apologize to them. So I'd like to remind you right now, there is nothing inherently critical about asking for some reciprocity and compassion from a partner or from a family member or from a friend if you feel like you're not getting it, as long as you're not actually attacking your character in the process. But to a narcissist, everything does seem like an attack. So to understand this a little bit better, let's look at two things that someone might say after being called some nasty names. So here's the first. "When you call me names, it makes me feel like you don't love me." And the second, "You're so stupid that you can't have a discussion without resorting to name calling." So one of those examples is actually an attack, and the other is an attempt at productive dialogue. But to a narcissist, they sound exactly the same. At least they sound the same when the narcissist is the one being asked to take responsibility or accountability. And here's a comment from someone who has been there. I've paraphrased this a little bit to keep it concise. But this commenter says, "One day he tells me he thinks the relationship isn't working because I'm judgmental and I have no compassion for others, which blindsided me because I never thought I was that way. I chalked it up to being glad I was called out and started working on myself. 2 days later, he breaks up with me for something minor. He kept coming back after, and we tried to make it work, but he was always cold and distant. I'm still grateful to this relationship because I feel much more in touch with my spirituality and I'm learning more about myself. Now, it can take a little bit of time before you see that silver lining because these relationships can really cause a whole lot of emotional upheaval. But there is so much room for growth. And if you do choose that path of growth, eventually most of us do end up thankful for the experience overall. And here's another comment that really highlights that lack of accountability, something that you will always see with a narcissist. The conversation shifts from you being honest about your feelings and how they've hurt you to you suddenly being manipulated into comforting them / apologizing. So another phrase that you may hear or simply just feel when you're around a narcissist is, it's fine when I do that, but you are absolutely not allowed. So it's essentially do as I say, not as I do. And they may come out and say something very much like that, or they may just act in a way that makes you feel that way. Like there's a different set of rules for them. And you essentially get the feeling that they think that they're above you and so that the rules don't apply to them. After all, they're the ones who create the rules, so they can break them, you cannot. So take cheating, for example. They'll give themselves a free pass to have affairs, then threaten to leave you if you so much as glance at another person. Or another example could be rule breaking. So maybe they drive around on a motorcycle recklessly with no helmet and then scold you as irresponsible if you so much as jaywalk. It's not always about how you relate to them or how you approach them. They will often project judgments about how you live your life in general when they're living their life in a way that definitely does not follow the same rules they expect of you. All right, so what's the harm in all this? Let's talk about it. Gradually, over time, these double standards seep in and chip away at your self-trust. It's kind of like when we talked about how they expect you to take responsibility for their anger issues. But in this case, it's not anger, but their entitlement that they want you to tiptoe around. And if you do, there's definitely a cost. Believing they deserve such entitlement, or even acting as though they deserve such entitlement, diminishes your own self-worth more and more each time. And if you're dealing with a narcissist, the answer is never to have a discussion about your feelings. And this is definitely a healthy way to resolve conflict in a healthy relationship. But with a narcissist, it's not going to help. In fact, it might do quite the opposite. So instead, I'd suggest figuring out how you can limit your exposure to their entitled behavior. And here's a comment from one of you who understands this entitlement very well. Wow. She'll pick up my phone and go through it randomly. But when I ask to see her phone, she'll shame me for it and call me abusive. Everything else is on point too. I never knew about this until one encounter too many to break the camel's back. So now how about you? Can you remember the encounter that broke the camel's back? I'd love to hear it in the comments if you can. So another phrase that you'll hear from a narcissist is, that's not the way I remember things at all. And this phrase highlights the narcissist's favorite move, rewriting history. Despite crystal clear evidence of their nonsense, they'll insist that you were the one who was wrong. And so you dig your heels in and provide context and proof in a desperate attempt to get them to see that they're wrong. That maybe you had a conversation and they actually said the things that they're claiming they didn't say. Have you ever been there? I know you have, because this is a hamster wheel that we all get stuck on at one time or another. But don't expect accountability. Don't expect that they're going to listen to reason or logic. They aren't getting it because they don't want to, because it's not convenient for their narrative. So you can ruminate all day about how you're going to explain it in a way that's going to make sense to them, but they're never going to admit that it makes sense simply because they don't want to. And if they really want to throw you off track, they'll attack you for distorting the facts. What we're talking about here is, you guessed it, gaslighting. And listen, we're not always right. Let's just face that right now. Unless we're narcissists, we're not always right. And we know that. But that's exactly why this technique works so well, because it gets you questioning yourself. Because you know you're not always right. So maybe you did misunderstand or mishear what the other person said. But I can't tell you how many clients I've spoken to throughout the years who have either recorded or taken notes after important conversations with the narcissist in their lives. And 100% of the time, when they go back and listen or read what really happened, they see that their version was correct. So if you're dealing with this right now, keeping records can really help you fact check those conversations that end up getting so distorted. You may never get the narcissist to see the truth, but at least you can hold on to what you know to be reality, instead of questioning whether they might be right. But just a word of caution here though, when it comes to recording conversations, consent laws vary based on where you live. So in some places it's illegal to record without consent. So just be careful about that. And here's a comment from one of you who has dealt with this firsthand. The ex-hus flat out denied horrible things he said, even when he was shown home movies of him saying it. Yeah, so sometimes even with undeniable proof, a narcissist will boldly cling to their story and lie in your face. Or they'll say it was taken out of context. So I mentioned in the beginning how important it is to look at the motivation behind these phrases. And by and large, the narcissist's motivation is to gain and maintain control. And the phrases we've covered here are just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to know more about all the mind games narcissists use for control, just click on the video that just popped up on the screen. And before you go, don't forget to hit that like button if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.